Good day, sir, and my fellow classmates. Today, we're going to talk about Indigenous cultures and traditions, which is our topic presented by Group 3. My name is Decadet Shaquille Cliriago Castro, and I'm going to talk about belief systems and spirituality. So, let's do it. The indigenous peoples of the Philippines, often referred to as Lumad in Mindanao, Igorot in Cordillera region, and various other names in different parts of the country, have rich and diverse belief systems and spiritual practices that are deeply rooted in their cultural heritage and connection to the land. It's important to note that there are over 100 distinct indigenous groups in the Philippines, each with its own unique beliefs and practices, so there is no single belief system that presents all of them. However, some common themes and elements can be found among many indigenous communities. So, the first one is ancestral worship. The value of ancestors and spirits is strongly held by many indigenous people in the Philippines. They frequently engage in ancestors worship, requesting help and protection from the spirits of their ancestors. The guardians of their territory and culture are believed to be ancestral spirits. Like me, sometimes before I go to sleep, I pray to my ancestors to always guide me and to always protect me. And next one is animism. In the Philippines, animism is a prevalent belief system among many indigenous peoples. They hold that natural objects like trees, rivers, mountains, and animals are home to spirits. It is thought that these spirits can affect daily life and that they need to be revered and placated through rituals and offerings. Um, in short, to, to, like that. And next one is connection to nature. There is strong bond between the natural world and the indigenous peoples of the Philippines. They consider themselves to be the land's stewards and adhere to the idea of living in harmony with the environment with the intention of guaranteeing a plentiful harvest and resource sustainable use. Many of their rites and ceremonies are focused on farming, hunting, and collecting. Next, rituals and ceremonies. Indigenous spiritually places a high value on rituals and ceremonies. These are Rituals are carried out during significant life events, including birth, marriages, and deaths, as well as throughout agricultural cycles and other social gatherings. In order to evoke the benefits of spirits, they entail making sacrifices, dancing, and chanting.
So good day everyone. So I am Decadet Jacob Emmanuel M. Kagaanan. So I am the one to discuss about indigenous language and scripts. So the Philippines is a culturally diverse archipelago that is home to several different indigenous languages and writing systems. Here are a few of the Philippines' notable indigenous language and scripts. Baybayin. The majority of Tagalog speakers still use the pre-colonial script known as Baybayin. It is a bugida which means that each character represents a consonant with a built-in vowel sound that may change by the use of diacritical marks. So prior to Spanish invasion, Baybayin was used to write a number of Philippine languages as a representation of Filipino cultural identity. Baybayin has recently gained renewed popularity. So the second language in scripts, Hanoo and Buhid. The indigenous Mangyan people of Mindoro, Philippines, employed Hanoo and Buhid scripts. The Hanoo and Buhid languages are written using these scripts. They use syllabic scripts and consonant and vowel letters. So the third language in scripts, Kulitan. The Kapampangan people of Pampanga primarily utilize the Kulitan script, another indigenous language of the Philippines. It is a special set of characters used to write the Kapampangan language. It is an abugida just like Baybayin.
Traditional arts and crafts of indigenous people in the Philippines. Arts are important to all people. Arts is beauty and art is history. Indigenous art are just art that a culture makes for itself that is reflective of history and values. Indigenous people in the Philippines excelled at arts craft because they were incredibly creative and were inspired by everything they saw, admiring and appreciating it for what it was before applying it to their own works of art. The traditional arts, one of the traditional arts is wood carving, basketry, metal works, goldsmith, tattooing, bamboo craft, and shell craft, and etc. Ang traditional arts kay magamit sa mga o magamit sunod na generasyon to encourage children or people to be creative and use their imagination while also providing a fun and interactive way for them to naturally develop essential skills. Daghan na taog mga handicrafts are traditionally been important part of the culture for some communities and tribes. It underpins our sense of identity and connects us to our past, each other, and the wider world. For example, kanang tattooing, kana sa Cordillera, si Wangud ba? Part na silang tradition ang batok tattoo as a indigenous people kay may kuhan sila kana silang tribu ba silang tribe. Because na sila ilang nga style nga unsaon pagtato sa uban kay machine man ilalain nila kuhan nilang gamit kanang gigamit nila nga kay charcoal ug water nya gimix ra nila nya ang gigamit nila pang dukduk kay kuan ra kanang bamboo stick 12 inches nga bamboo stick o turn mao na ilang gikuan tusok nga ila ra nang dukdukon sa bamboo stick para mo sud ang sa panit na mao na arion sa mga uban turista nga gikan sa gawas tungod sa atong culture or tungod sa ilang tungod sa tribo nilang culture nga art nga inana kay rare kay na siya nga art kay wala na sa uban nasud man ang moari jud na ang mga turista para magpatato niya si Wangod dili ba na siya dali siya maduulan pero dili adto niya lugar kay tungod sa kalayo and bukid kanila sa Luzon and kana part na siya sa traditional arts and crafts of indigenous people of the Philippines kanang kang Wangod.
This is rituals and ceremonies. So based of what I have seen in YouTube, example, the Ifugao. So the Ifugao people of Cordillera region in northern Philippines have a rich cultural heritage and unique set of rituals and ceremonies that are important part of their spiritual and cultural practices. So I have two examples of their rituals and ceremonies. So banga is a traditional dance of the Ifugao people, which is performed by women carrying clay pots on their heads
So it is often performed during rice planting and harvesting. Next is Bagyo. Bagyo is a traditional Ifugao wedding ceremony which is involve a series of rituals and offering to the couples and ancestors and deities. So it is community event that involves music and dance and feasting.
The prehistoric and the early historical periods of the inhabitants of Filipino archipelago, the ancestors of the modern Filipino people are included in the pre-colonial Philippines cultural accomplishments, agriculture, societal and environmental nations, spiritual beliefs, and as well as the advancements of technology, science, and the arts are only few of the native people cultural achievements and the noteworthy of many ethnic civilizations.
Indigenous resistance and revolts. The history of the Philippines is characterized by numerous indigenous resistance movements and uprisings against foreign colonizer, particularly against Spanish colonial rule, which lasted for more than 3 centuries, 1565 to 1898. These indigenous uprisings were frequently motivated by a need for self-determination, freedom from oppression, and preservation of their ancestral lands and cultures. Here are some notable indigenous uprisings and resistance in the Philippines. The Gohoy Rebellion in 1744 to 1829. Polaris Revolt in 1762 to 1765. Tumahobong Revolt in 1824, Bontoc Igorot Uprising in 1889, Cordillera Uprising in 1891, Philippine Revolution in 1896 to 1898. Although most of these revolts failed because the majority of the local population sided up with the well-armed colonial government and to fight with the Spanish as foot soldiers to put down the revolts.
So, my topic is about the ancestral domain and land tenure system. So, the concept of this is the ancestral domain refers to the territory that indigenous peoples or native communities have occupied, possess, and utilize individual or collectively for traditional culture and or livelihood purposes. So, the owned lands kaysa una wala pa man lang itawag og kanang titulo sa yuta. So, the concept of ancestral domains recognize the long-standing relationship between indigenous peoples and their lands and natural resources, which are often considered as integral parts of their cultural identity and social organization. And also, the concept of land tenure is closely related to ancestral domain in that it refers to the legal and customary rights. So, diri na gikuan nga dapat na nakay titulo sa land tenure serve as kani imong yuta unsa kadaka imong yuta, because land tenure as well as the rules and regulations governing to the issue, access, control, and transfer of land and natural resources from person. For example, imong mama gahatag nimo og land which is na kontrata, so pwede niya ipasa ang kontrata sa imuha. So imuha na nga og pangalan sa imuha. And land tenure system vary across different cultures and countries. Depende na gina sa lugar nga asa ka. and involve individual or collective land ownership. So, maong giingon, land ownership, leaseholds, arrangements, customary land use rights, and communal land management, and so on. So, kanang overall, so understanding is the ancestral domain and land tenure system is important din siya because it provide insight, mahata na siya insight sa social culture, economic realities of indigenous communities, and help guide policies and decision making that promote social justice, human rights, and sustainable development. Thank you.
Challenges in land disputes and exploitation. In the Philippines, ongoing issues like land disputes and the exploitation of indigenous groups have persisted for centuries. These problems have their roots in past injustices, unequal power relationships, and competing interests. The following are some of the major issues that indigenous communities in the Philippines are facing. First is land disposition. Land disposition is where our indigenous communities have historically lost access to their ancestral lands, frequently as a result of land grabbing by influential people or businessmen, such as logging or mining businesses. So next is limited legal protections. The implementation of these rights remains difficult despite the fact that the indigenous peoples are still suffering for being not able to properly live in their own land. So next is extraction industries. Without the effect of communities' free and prior informed consent, mining and logging operations frequently take place within or close to indigenous territories, resulting in environmental degradation, evictions, and social unrest. Next is violence and human rights violations. So here, if the indigenous leaders, activists, and community members advocating for the land rights and environmental protections are often subjected to violence and harassment and even extrajudicial killings. Next is economic marginalization. Indigenous communities often face economic marginalization with limited access to education, healthcare, and livelihood opportunities. Next is cultural erosion. So indigenous communities' traditional ways of life are disrupted by displacement and exploitation and results in the deterioration of cultural practices, languages, and traditions. Lack of representation. Indigenous peoples are underrepresented in political decision making, making it challenges to advocate for their rights and interests at the local, regional, and national levels. So, next is inadequate legal remedies. Legal process for resolving land disputes can be slow, costly, and biased against indigenous communities. They often lack the capacity and resources to engage in protracted legal battles. So lastly is the climate change and vulnerability. Indigenous communities often living in environmental sensitive areas are vulnerable to impacts of climate change, including extreme weather events and sea level rise. Climate-related displacement further exacerbates land tenure issues.
Good day. My topic is about indigenous and indigenous ecological knowledge. Indigenous ecological knowledge refers to the understanding the practice and the beliefs regarding to the natural environment that are developed sa mga indigenous people and local communities with their environment through long-term observation, interaction, and relationship with the environment. It includes also traditional knowledge about the behavior of plants and animals, weather patterns, natural cycles, and sustainability resources management and practice. So, what is their purpose? Ang may lang purpose nga nung nasa knowledge about the ecological system sa mga nga lahat ma-preserve ang biodiversity because they want people because they acknowledge that people depends on nature, like we depend on natural resources so that's why they practice on how to conserve nature for people, not conserve people for the nature. So they practice to conserve the nature for the people in order to sustain their goods, their needs. For example, fish, vegetables, so that in the future we can still have those resources from our lands. That's why indigenous people, they have deep knowledge before, and also they pass their knowledge from generation to generation. That's why still today they practice on how to conserve nature for the people. Thank you.